the context to what I'm going to show you numbers really this evening and introduce you to them. And we've got such a lot. We've now literally got hundreds of thousands of data points on voter behavior in the country. We don't understand all of it. We probably understand about 10% of what we possess. I'm going to show you a little bit of that. The context to it is that something important is happening. That here in the territory of present-day South Africa for 400 years, one player could determine the rules of the game politically and enforce those to a lesser or greater extent on everybody else. That era is changing. And in a future South Africa, no single political actor will be able to do that again. We're probably going to end up in a position where the largest political party's got about a third of the vote. Africanist, rural, older demographic. Second biggest is going to have a quarter to a third, cosmopolitan, urban, aspirant, emerging and established middle class. About 10 or 15% will be the Marxist left. And the balance, which will be the kingmakers, will be small, splinter, ethno-nationalist, quite conservative, some truly right-wing political movements who will make up the balance. And in that, we're simply becoming a country where the politics reflects the fragmentation of the people. And had at any interval in the last 400 years, South Africa's people been able to elect their government, they would have elected something that would approximate this kind of fragmentation. It doesn't mean something's gone wrong in our political system. We are a PR system in a fundamentally free society of a very diverse population. This is the inevitable result. The fact that the ANC was dominant for the last 25 years is an anomaly that comes out of the apartheid era and was always going to end when lived experience of apartheid as an influence faded in favor of new social and economic stresses, which has happened. I think my data comes and goes, so let's see what happens. To give you a sense of things, and there's a lot here, and I'll send it all to the FMF guys and they can share some of it with you. Just to give you a bird's eye view, 41 million adults in the country. 26 million of those are registered to vote. Last time, 2019, 18 million of those voted. So have in your minds the idea that 1.8 million, let's say 2 million voters are 10% of the electorate, and how we move those 2 millions around through this evening gives you a sense of who's winning and losing elections. 10 million of the 26 and of the 18 million who voted for the ANC. 2 million voted for the EFF, 4 million voted for the DA, and 2 million voted for other opposition parties that were essentially not ANC and EFF, although the distinctions here are sometimes more complex. So the way the game starts, if you have a view of the ANC and the EFF in one camp and something else in another, is 12 plays 6. And on these units of 2 million votes, we've got to move those numbers around to see who's going to win the next election. To give you some idea of that, there's this segmentation of the registered voter base. Now remember what registered voters are. They're the 41 million adults, 26 million registered, 18 million vote. Of the 26 million who registered to vote, we wanted to categorize them into groups that would help us understand them a bit better. So we ended up with availables and in-reaches and peripherals and unavailables. And what we're measuring is essentially one thing. If you're an available, you're a person who likes to hear centrist, pragmatic messaging, moderate, centrist, liberal, Democrat, pragmatic messaging about the importance of a group of political parties coming together to offer an alternative to what has been the one-party dominance of the ANC. When you hear that sort of thing, if I said to you, if I was the leader of a party and I said we should do, well, what us in this room mostly, I'm familiar with some of you, not all, we think are sensible things, list them on education or whatever, get the opposition together to do that, you would hear that and think, that's great, that's what I think. That's half of the registered voter base, and that's very fortunate because it could have been very different. We don't have to convince people to believe in sensible ideas, they already do. A third of the registered voter base is in reach of becoming availables. If you as a political party spend a lot of time and money talking to them and convincing them, they'll come across to that category. So 70% of the voter base is now pragmatic, centrist, largely sensible. Peripherals will be very hard to turn. The way they answer many of the questions we've asked them suggests to us that they're dogmatic and they're stuck and they're not going to go for this. And 7.5% are hostile to this idea. They don't like it, they don't like the centrist messaging, they're not going to happen. So off the sort of bat this evening, 70% of the voter market is open to sense and moderation, working together democratically, and 47% actually just loves that when they hear it. Now, let's break that market down, just the availables a bit. So I'll show you some measures of them. Of all the availables, remember the availables are 47% of the 26 million who registered. Of the available, 75% of them are black, and coloured, Indian and white make up, 10% and below of what is left over. And I will send this to you, David, so people don't have to take too detailed notes. In terms of their age groups, 30 to 39 is the really big market share, and actually over that. So there's an idea in some of the new startup political parties, we'll go get the youth vote. Youth vote's very difficult to get hold of because it's firstly not registered to vote, and then some of these parties say they're going to register people and get them to vote. This is almost an impossible task because a non-registered voter doesn't buy the product. You first got to spend money and time convincing them to register, and then you've got to convince them to vote. Much simpler to market yourself inside the available base, the established voting base, which is what well-drilled and experienced political parties tend to do. And you immediately split the amateurs from the serious guys on the question of whether they're going to get the youth vote. In terms of where these voters reside, 20% live in suburbs, a few in CBDs. Townships is 1/3 of the market, and there's a vast market sitting in traditional rural areas that's waiting to, it's often a bit more conservative than some of the more urban markets. If you ask voters, this is now not just the availables, but overall, I'm sure, Gabriel, all. Gabriel is, if you haven't met him, he's my assistant in this, and he does a lot of the work on this, and put this briefing together for me this afternoon. If you say to the availables, what are the most important things that this sort of future government would need to do for you to be happy with it? The top issue they cite is jobs and unemployment, then crime and security, then corruption, then basic services. It doesn't mean these other things are less important. There's a hierarchy of needs. And then a new one that's popping up that's very dangerous is illegal immigration. That wasn't in polling a few years ago. It's now emerging. Blame the other, make a scapegoat, and we can lynch the scapegoat and chase them away, and we'll have full employment. The unimportant issues in the relative order of things are things like racism, the virus was there still, climate change, land reform, public transport. Why the ANC, and I'll show you its numbers, of course, this evening, is being divorced from its voter base, is that it keeps stressing that it will solve these problems for people when it's unable to solve the problems that sit over here. It's not really the things that people want, so it doesn't work politically, no matter how much you play it up in the mainstream media and the like. The public doesn't think these things are not important things, but in the hierarchy of things, those are absolutely critical. And if you cannot now, as an opposition party, cultivate the realistic expectation in the minds of voters that you can solve these things, it'll be very difficult to pull more out of the ANC base than have already departed.